So, welcome to our engagement masterclass on how losing food manufacturers drive impact across the employee lifecycle. We've got some really interesting insight to share with you today. And what we'll be doing is plodding through the webinar. Today, this session will be led by myself. So, if we could just switch to the next slide, John. My name's Melison Foster. I am responsible for our client experience here at WorkBuzz, which means basically onboarding through to exiting from us and boomeranging back around. We make sure that you have a delightful experience no matter what you do with WorkBuzz and what package you take with us. And today I am joined by the main man who looks better, I would say, in current form than he has done himself justice with his current profile photo, but John Backhouse. John, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Thank you for joining today. Yes, I've been at WorkBuzz for about 4 years now. I've head of people science and lead consultant for many of our clients across all sectors, but some of our larger food manufacturing and manufacturing clients. I've been working in the world of employee research 30 years. I did a sad calculation the other week, 55,000 hours of employee experience. So a bit over the 10,000 Gladwell limit for being an expert in something, I guess. So hopefully I'm going to share that experience with us today.
John. And for those of you that don't know WorkBuzz as of yet, we are a trusted partner to over 400 organisations for their employee listening strategies. We're really big believers in partnering with other organisations, and we combine our survey platform with people. So people like John that are true experts in this field, and will help you move things further and faster than you may have ever imagined because of their depth of experience and knowledge in this space. We do also have custom built AI within our platform. So we're on the leading edge on that in terms of our platform. But what we do like to do, as is right to do, I think, speaking to people professionals, is build AI with people front of mind. We see a lot of horror stories. I'm sure you're all facing into them as people leaders, but absolute reassurance that there's a big team of people here that want to serve you and partner with you if you work with WorkBuzz. We've worked across many industries, but we have a stronghold in food manufacturing with some amazing brands that we've had the delight of working with over multiple years, some just listed here. And I'm sure John will be bringing a few of their stories a bit to life. And if anybody ever wants to have more of a deep discussion with us, if you have any questions as we go along, then please do use the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of the screen, and I will take questions as we go through the data. John's got a lot of information to present, so do ask us about it, and we'd love to hear any stories that you have and any kind of insight that you might want to share. All right, John, over to you.
Fantastic. So as Mel said, we have a lot of information to share. For anybody that's met me before or heard about me, I'm quite an analytical person, blue personality type. So bear with me, there is quite a lot in here, but I hope you really do take value in the depth of insight. So let's start big picture. In terms of a bit of inspiration, we're talking about small things that make a big difference. A couple of quotes. Great things are done by a series of small things brought together. It's the little details that are vital that make those big things happen. And my personal favourite is this final one here. You can't always do those great things or do the small things in a great way. And when we're looking at employee experience, a lot of the things which will big, deep impact in organisations are those massive things that take many years to do, like culture change, manager capability, completely different recruitment strategy and promotion strategy, and all those massive things. But they're not always the things that can turn the dial quickly for us. And hopefully by the end of today, we'll see what those small things are. So in terms of the scale of small things, big problem, if we just look at the perceptions from people on system, tools, resources, and the physical environment over the previous few years, the reason we're starting with that is because many of the small things are around those enablers that people have or don't have at work. So if you just build this in a animation quickly over the last few years. So given the amount of data I've used to collate this together, a 1 or 2% difference is a significant difference. So the fact that people's perceptions towards those enablers, those systems, tools, and their work environment has gone down from 68 to 62 is a pretty significant drop, even over a couple of years. And when we get further in, we'll start to understand what maybe some of those smaller things are and how they're having an impact on people. There is an impact, though, also on well-being. So if you haven't got the systems and tools and enablement by nature, then that's going to cause you stress and impact your physical, mental health well-being. So if we put one of our slow build animations on, remember 2% up or down hasn't happened by chance. So unfortunately, no surprises that along with those resources and enablers going down in terms of satisfaction with, then well-being is also trending down from 67 to 59. And we're only talking about a couple of years. And we see this day in, day out across all sectors, but in particular manufacturing, obviously working in a very difficult environment, having the tools to do the job and then not having those tools and the impact that has on you trying to deliver your job. Now, the other thing as well against this backdrop that I hear time and time again, and that's in presentations, and I typically do up to 4 presentations every week, is the discussion around organisations asking people to do more with the same, but often more with less. And that's workload, resources, the number of people in the team not being backfilled if somebody leaves. So people themselves are saying that if we had a smaller team, we could possibly operate if we had all those efficiencies and better tools and systems and processes in place. But what unfortunately happens from the word of the employee is the teams get smaller, but the resources and enablers get more and more tired. So it's actually a double whammy hitting their well-being over time. And in the previous years as well, doing this job a very long time, we used to be able to overcome stress and workload by throwing more people at the problem. And that just isn't possible nowadays. So if you want to face the problem, workloads and increasing demands on us, then we've got to look at it in a different way in terms of being far more efficient and enabled. Top reasons for staying or leaving. So reasons for staying, job arrangements, flexibility is really important for people, enjoyment of the job, the relationship with your leader, your manager, etc. And then in terms of reasons for leaving, common ones we find is pay and recognition. So it's not always just pay itself, but that wider sense of recognition and investing in people via their career. But unfortunately, we increasingly see well-being in the top 5 reasons as a stated reason for leaving. So not only has the satisfaction with your own well-being or rating of your own well-being gone down over time, it's actually now a stated reason for leaving an organisation. Even so far as people saying, I'm leaving this organisation, not for another role. I've just so stressed and burnt out that I need to take time out away from the workplace. Hence why many of the statistics show the economically inactive group growing, that people are coming out, not going back into the workplace, etc. And that is part of the problem underpinning that. So it's all in the mix, enablement linked to well-being. If we're asking our people to do more with less or the same, then we need to give them the tools to enable them to do that. Hope that's all making sense so far. Now, one thing I want to leave before we move on to here, and I can't remember where I got this quote from, but it's stuck in my mind. Was it maybe a webinar I saw somewhere else or a book that I read? But it's this thing around well-being. So as employers, we're paying people for their time, knowledge, skills and experience. So that's all well and good. But are we paying them to own their health and well-being? So if there's anything we're doing that's impacting on their health and well-being, does that give us the right, because we're paying them a salary, to affect that negatively? So it's just something that's stuck in my mind, that we need to look after our people. We're paying for certain things, but if we're having an impact in them in other ways, then that's out of the remit. So just bear that in mind. So one really interesting way of looking at the impact of satisfaction with work environment systems, tools or enablers is looking at the difference then in some of the engagement question scores and other question scores between those who are satisfied with the enablers and those who aren't satisfied with the enablers. So we have a say, stay, strive model within WorkBuzz. So say is that advocacy of work-ins in terms of pride and willingness to recommend. Motivation is the outcome in terms of people wanting to give more at work. So we're showing that one first. And the reason I'm showing that one first is because along my career, I've analysed the different elements of engagement, and motivation, the discretionary effort part of the element, certainly the service delivery, productivity lights is the most important. Now just look at the difference in that one question. So those who are satisfied with the work environment systems and tools are scoring motivation at 92% positive, and those that aren't are scoring at 41%. So a big differentiator in motivation. Ministry of the obvious, I guess, that if you haven't got the systems and tools and being asked to do more, then that's going to impact in your motivation levels. So in terms of pride, one of the say elements of the engagement model, again, where you do have those systems and tools, you're more proud to work for that organisation. Where you don't, you're far less proud to work for that organisation. In terms of intention to stay or leave, so is it a factor we've just seen in terms of well-being and the link between well-being and enablement? See myself working here, far more likely to see yourself working here if you're well enabled in the organisation versus not. In terms of willingness to recommend, well, if it's a frustrating work experience, why would you recommend working here to other people to also have that frustrating work experience? So again, ministry of the obvious, but sometimes by putting numbers against these, putting them up in lights, it really does hit home. Now, there's another dimension as well, which is that external advocacy of our products and services. So from personal experience of talking to people, reading many survey comments over many years, if you know behind the scenes that things aren't working well, then you're going to be less likely to recommend those products to other people. So it impacts in so many ways: internal advocacy, external advocacy, motivation, productivity, pride, even that sense of recommending other people. Now, within food manufacturing and certain manufacturing environments, quite a few people come into that environment via a relative or a friend saying, oh, there's a job going at such a place. So that advocacy is so important in recruitment in many other ways as well. I hope that, again, is making sense, maybe quantifying or qualifying some of the things you already suspected. Now, if we then look at some other elements of the experience, and we do the same again, those who are enabled and happy with that, or not feeling enabled, and the difference in their views in the rest of the experience, some key things. So satisfaction with benefits, well, that sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? Why would you be less satisfied with benefits if you're feeling less enabled? And it's something called equity theory. So if I'm getting a lovely work environment in relative terms, and there's lots here, not just tea and coffee, but toilets, canteens, I'm doing a very difficult job. It's got air conditioning in summer and it's got heating in winter, and it's a nice environment. That's going to make me less likely to question other benefits, if that makes sense. So it's that opportunity cost that I'm weighing. It's a lovely environment, but I could get better pay elsewhere. And if we actually take the pay question, you can see that there. So the amount of conversations I've had with organisations where they say someone's left for 20 pence more, but then ended up coming back to us because they said it wasn't worth that 20 pence more because it was a horrible working environment, and I'm willing to take less money here slightly as long as it's a much nicer environment that I'm working in.
Agreed. I think that's really interesting, John. Just on your point on equity theory, have you seen things change as generational expectations have changed as well? Especially with your benefits part, I think. Could you speak to any notable differences you've seen as younger generations have kind of come through the ranks in this industry?
There's a million different ways of looking at what people want, and it's life stage as well. As people get slightly older and have mortgages and children, then maybe pay becomes an equation of it's an essential rather than a desirable. Younger people, the main takeout for younger people that I see is more about what they want out of life in terms of work-life balance, in terms of not necessarily wanting the most pay in the world, and because can I ever get on the property ladder or not? So having a nice life with a nice flexible working environment is really important. But people
And
midlife,
trickier in manufacturing.
yeah, and we'll actually get into life cycle in terms of looking at length of service and age and things like that, and differences as well in terms of some of the things that stand out there. One thing just before I move on about age as well is, there are many published studies about younger people not wanting to take on that supervisor, team leader role, certainly moving into lower level junior management, middle management, because they see a lot of stress for not much more money. And we'll get into the chat about succession planning as well as we look at age versus length of service as well.
Thank you.
Eye-opening. Okay, health and safety and well-being itself, we've already sort of covered that one, but you can see those that are enabled, their views on the organisation caring for their well-being is much higher than those that aren't enabled. And even health and safety, obviously, if we're not replacing tired kit, dirty working conditions, then that's going to bring along health and safety issues or potential higher risk as well. And then that general sense of feeling valued at work as well. So back to that equity theory. And then finally, safe to speak up and challenge the way things are done. And that's a really interesting one to finish on for this slide. Why would that be different between those who are enabled versus not enabled, if that's the right word? Because most of the things that people speak up about in a manufacturing environment are about systems, processes and tools and frustrations and ways of working. And if they keep saying about the same things over and over again and nothing's being done about them and they don't feel listened to, then sooner or later they're going to stop talking about these things and start to be disengaged. So it's so important to action, even if we say why we can't do certain things, but keep giving us your ideas and let's have a mechanism for collecting those ideas. Another thing we did is looking at culture. So we asked people from a list of words to rate the culture where you work. There's a balanced mix of words between positive and negative words. So hopefully we'll get a more balanced view on the positive side and people talking more about the positive elements. But when they start talking about the negative elements of the culture and the experience, this is an example. Look at all the things that are around those small things: enablement, inefficiency, bureaucratic, political, following processes, hierarchical, which causes us needing to work longer hours. It's fragmented, it's inefficient. Most of the things on the right hand side are more about systems, processes, and enablement than outright culture, I would say. And if we then take that same example through to looking at those who are engaged and disengaged, and those over to the right are the disengaged colleagues. And you can see many of the experiences of the disengaged are around inefficiencies, lack of enablement, not being supported. It's unrewarding because people call in our equity theory. You keep asking me to do more and more with less and less and more tied equipment, but you're not paying me for that additional stress and strain. So that's why that equity theory kicks in so many ways. So a lot of information so far looking at the same thing from many different angles, I would say. Mel?
Yeah, we've got a question, which I think speaks to a couple of your previous slides. And what we have is an ask if there is, sorry, is there the same link between satisfaction and well-being, not just environment?
Okay, can you rephrase the question?
So it's do you see a link, I guess, between employee satisfaction and their well-being? So not just the environment influencing their
Okay, in general,
well-being.
yeah, in
Yes.
general, yeah, yeah. So not only is well-being one of the top reasons stated for intending to leave an organisation, but it's often one of the biggest and most consistent drivers of engagement when you map all the questions from a survey.
Yeah. And I would say as well, I think, or even in my experience, it may not have been a theme that turned up about 10, 15 years ago. Like I was in-house for a little while. It was not on our radar that well-being was driving engagement, but more so now, would you say? Or post-COVID effect? What are your thoughts on why it's
Um,
changed?
I think post-COVID, organisations are increasingly asking the people, definitely, there's no, have conversations with exec teams and say, just yes or no, are you asking your people to do more for the same or less? Well, yes, because we're having
Yeah.
pressure from our investors that we need to do more and hit targets. But the world's changing, making being an organisation successful is so much harder now that difficult decisions are having to be made as well. So we're asking people to work harder for less or the same because of those constraints of having to,
Yeah.
survive in some instances and take difficult business decisions. So you've got the people, needing to hit higher levels, but having the stresses and strains of constantly being restructured over and over
Mhm.
again and learning new roles and responsibilities or different ways of doing things. So the combination of those things, and then you've got people themselves who've changed, who maybe want a different lifestyle and resilience changing as well for certain people. And, all these factors have sort of all hit home at the same time.
Yeah, we've realised life is very short. Yeah, haven't we? I think over recent years. Thank you.
Definitely. Okay, so let's look at this from a different angle. So that's the scale of the problem, ultimately in a nutshell, that we're asking people to do more with the same or less, and then we're not giving them updates on those enablers. So if you look at some of the open comments, we can look macro, but let's look micro first in terms of what are some of those small things are. And you might laugh when you look at some of these things. So imagine you're working in a very harsh environment. We're asking you to do a lot. It's not the nicest conditions. You're doing a very difficult job. So what would make a difference for people in that environment? Food, food options, desk space. If you do work in an office environment, because that's still in an operational and food manufacturing, still got office-based people coming into the office and there's no docking stations, having more reliable systems, Wi-Fi and gaps on site when you're asking me to fill in paperwork and do admin on a tablet, but I can't get a connection to the systems. Simple one, second canteen TV that company information on, and it was broken, so it got removed. Maybe somebody who removed it didn't know it was so important to our people. Having clean toilets 24/7, especially for shift workers overnight, giving the chance to go to the toilet when needed. That sounds, a basic requirement, but as I said, I read a lot of comments, see open comments over and over again, and people not allowed to go to the toilet. I know there is a balance of some people maybe taking the mickey or not, but it's, in real terms, it affects people who aren't. IT running a shoestring, not having those laptops for training or emergencies. So if you're working in a difficult manufacturing job, the training part of the organisation, not having those laptops to use, things like carpets, bathroom locks broken, kitchen too small. Having heating is a constant. If somebody could create a personal environment for people, they'd be a multi-billionaire. But that's in an office environment alone, never mind working in a cold warehouse. So it's so important to get those things right. And food, people are led and productive via their stomachs. If they're doing a difficult job, that makes a huge difference. Again, conditions within warehouse, drivers having access to simple things like screen wash and AdBlue and coolant, and then having a cleaner on the weekend, so when you come back into the environment, then everything's nice and tidy and clean. So Mel, question?
Yeah, another question. So I think one that actually is very fitting to ask at this point is if there's any ideas you can share on getting buy-in from leadership, because there's such a big focus on bottom line metrics that I think we're all feeling at the moment. Cost of maybe changing the canteen, the cost of upgrading the laptops, it's all under such big scrutiny. So any ideas you can share on getting buy-in from leaders?
That's a difficult one, of being cost benefit analysis machines, trying to provide the evidence that those things will make a difference. We've already seen so far in just these slides alone in terms of the impact on people intending to leave, the impact on their maybe productivity levels, even health and safety levels in not having the right equipment. So it's then going beyond all of this and trying to provide the evidence in, look, if you do these things, then you will move the dial on number of accidents and near misses, providing that evidence. Losing far fewer people and the impact on that as well, in terms of then those people working, with fewer people alone, retaining our people, and the cost of then having to re-recruit. And it's trying to put a number against all of those things by doing simple things, having a nice working environment. And the biggest one is possibly the pay thing. If you can, as we saw earlier, if you can have an environment where people are saying opportunity cost, I could go elsewhere for 20 pence an hour, but I'm going to stay here because it's nicer and they've got lovely things in the canteen and nice clean toilets and good lockers and flexible working arrangements and things like that. The cost of trying to re-recruit or lose people alone, or pay them more, so they're going to be less questioning on pay and benefits. And that's the biggest one. If we gave the whole company an extra 20p an hour versus the cost of providing nicer food and locks on toilets, which one's gonna win out when we provide the evidence? So it's evidence in all of those things, the cost benefit analysis machines, which tend to be leaders, unfortunately, but that's why they are who they are.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, John. I think I was sharing with you that I've had a little bit of experience when I was in-house where we created a pot. So the leadership team signed off a certain pot. It had a cap, and then it was part of a state agency. This was so all the branches came with very humble requests. Typically, there was no more than £1,000 for each request, but the difference it made for each one of those estate agencies and offices that came to us and actually changed those things was phenomenal in terms of engagement and getting people doing the right things. So yeah, it's being creative sometimes, even when you have less, or finding the people that have the skills or are very good and handy with the screwdriver in hand, potentially. Hacky ways of doing it sometimes.
Definitely. And a real life example then on the difference that this can make. So recently in a manufacturing environment, I did presentations for different sites. One of the particular sites had much higher scores, much higher levels of engagement, which went with lower attrition and other performance metrics. And when we had the debate about, what was so different, because people there felt action had been taken from the previous survey results, one of the biggest things that came out of those previous survey results for that site was around the canteen facilities, and the leader of that site had immediately got onto that and realised the importance of those things and had a meeting with the canteen manager, and the scores had gone up across the board, not just for facilities, but many other things, views on many other things. It came out this time they wanted further enhancements in the canteen for that same site, next level enhancements, more vegan choices and things like that. the leader of that site had already read the open comments in advance of me presenting the results, and he'd already scheduled a meeting with the canteen manager literally straight after the presentation.
Amazing.
Chat through these things and see what they can do further on there, and pick up on a few other things like toilet cleanliness and regulate how regular the toilets are cleaned. So that's a leader and how a leader could do that, seeing the difference of those things and how it had impacted engagement and retention and other things as well.
I absolutely love that level of ownership as well, and away from HR completely. It's what matters on site to my people, and simple things that you can act on typically that costs no more or less.
Yeah, toilets and canteens, that'll be the first place to start and work out from there. Okay. Then this is an example of taking employee open comments and using AI. So just for those who don't use the WorkBuzz platform, there's plenty of AI in our platform and more things to come. So we're going to provide a new functionality just looking purely at open comments, which will then almost ask the AI to speak back to me what it's like to work here, as if you're speaking up on behalf of your colleagues. So this was specifically targeted at the theme of workload and inefficiency. So the first thing you can see is people feeling overworked and stretched thin due to understaffing and increased workloads. Everything that we've discussed so far, putting out those fires rather than working proactively. So all of the things on here, you can use the AI and the WorkBuzz platform, not only to tell you there's an issue, but then through the voice of the people, what they want to do most and what are their biggest frustrations. But interestingly, we asked the AI specifically about workload and inefficiencies, and it's pulled out career development and pay. So it's clever enough to know that equity theory is at play. It's clever enough to know that people are talking about these things in terms of your investment in the site and inefficiencies, making them efficient, is linked to then my views on investing in me as a person. I'm giving you this, what are you giving me back? We didn't ask it to do that. That's what it's done itself. So that is a learning in itself to back up the things that we've looked at so far. And if we theme the comments, just how it's number one thing on here in terms of what would make the biggest difference, and workload and resource allocation. But again, we asked it to list all the frustrations around workload and inefficiency, and it's pulling out many other things as well. Whenever we do that, these things go hand in hand. So again, it's that equity theory. If you're asking me to do this, what are you giving me back in return? Because unfortunately in organizations, they're taking away things from people, but asking them to do more and more and taking away things in many different ways.
Yeah. So interesting, especially in this environment where continuous improvement, lean manufacturing is critical. The top improved systems and processes goes hand in hand with what leadership and managers are typically trying to do as well. So interesting where models sometimes aren't working.
Definitely. Okay, and again, and these are just general comments about working here. The hope is that leadership will take our feedback seriously, as a thing up at the top, wanting to be listened to. So people do appreciate certain things, but again, on here, I see this time and time again. This is taken from a couple of examples. Working conditions, site facilities in poor condition with inadequate heating, and there's our friend the toilets again. Because workload is excessive and it leads to stress and we need more staff. But if we're working in a more efficient way with more technology and better equipment, then would we be calling out staff, and would I then be calling out the fact that the pay isn't making pace? Yes, and obviously the world's a more expensive place than it ever has been, but that might lessen the comments around, as we've seen in the data itself. And again, inefficiency, understaffing, poor process, unclear role. So again, what I'm showing this for is not what's on here, is the ability then to use AI to theme comments, to almost become the action plan. So we've seen the importance of these small things, but what are those small things? Well, we can actually put a number against them and say, well, actually, you need to go at these things on here to feel a happier place. And it's our usual culprits on here, but it's almost an action plan now rather than just a list of comments. It's telling us what we need to do. Okay. Now, part of today was just looking at a few things around the employee life cycle, in particular in food manufacturing, some things that we're finding differences. So there's a few eye-opening things when you step back and look at this data, and actually opening for me, because I do have these conversations client by client rather than holistically across multiple clients within an individual sector. So taking food manufacturing clients and looking at some of the profiling. Houston, we have a problem that we've got a lot of people front loaded into our organization. So there must be a rotating door going on. You know, at the start, people come and go, come and go, come and go. And then we've got a core of people with sort of 6+ length of service, our sort of longer serving, our lifers, for want of a better word. I've heard that said to me in a presentation. Oh, the lifers, that's what they're called internally. So
Yeah.
we've got a lot of lifers in food manufacturing and manufacturing full stop, but then you've got a revolving door of people coming and going with less length of service. And then you've got those people sat in the middle. So that's pretty eye-opening in its own right in terms of that polarization of those two groups. Age profile. So half of workforce are 45 plus. Well, going to retire, aren't they, in 10 or 15 years? If we've got that rotating door and younger people maybe not wanting to come into such a difficult job, what are we going to do? And I do ask that question a lot, and I sort of get, we're looking at this, but, you know, how are we looking at this and how are we preparing for this, you know, in terms of succession planning that, you know, at least, well, if we just look at the 55, 64 and 65 plus, you know, at least a quarter of the workforce are going to be gone in maybe the next five years or not. So it's a really difficult thing to see, and far fewer people in that younger group coming into the organisation. And then this was quite interesting. So again, you know, this might not apply to you, but I did take, you know, a good cross section of our food manufacturing clients, heavily male dominated, 26% female, 51% and ONS in terms of balance between females and males in the UK. So we're heavily underrepresented by females in the workforce, or heavily male, older, longer serving. So you know, in terms of if the population is, you know, 50% roughly of each gender, and we're not pulling in young people, you know, how do we move that through and upweight that moving forwards? Now, I could provide evidence from other things in here, but discussions with females as well in terms of work-life balance and flexible working in particular, and having more flexible options, and maternity pay and other benefits as well. I mean, obviously that does apply paternity, maternity, but flexible working in particular is something that I do see day in, day out in surveys from females where you don't have that flexibility. Mel, you got a question?
Not so much a question, I was just thinking, does this play into the need for us to recraft jobs somewhat in manufacturing, especially with technology that's coming in, being conscious of certain environments that we see our clients operate in? So we've got some clients that have like abattoirs or cold stores where females feel naturally females will always prefer a warmer temperature than males. Males run warmer than most females, a couple of degrees. That's a science fact. It's not just in our office. But it's looking at those kind of job conditions, and then with the use of technology, is there a better way of crafting jobs sometimes in certain areas that might better help us?
Yeah,
Potentially,
no, that's
it's
a
thinking
great
through.
observation. You hear about sort of resource groups of females in leadership and resource groups of female in sort of IT and programming, and
Yeah,
in all of the times I've been looking at results, in particular food manufacturing, they may exist, but I don't know if there's sort of gender specific resource groups of females looking at, you know, how could that job be recrafted, and what females in, because we're missing, you know, so many females in the working population that we're not pulling from. And if we've got a succession planning of older male longer serving people, you know, how we're going to backfill that by, we need to look at things differently.
agreed. And even the age piece. And I think I've seen it more so in logistics more than anywhere, where they're really conscious they have a lack of female drivers, a lot of the orgs that we're working with. And yeah, there's ways of improving and reselling it. Thank you, John.
But yeah, it's a storm that's been happening for a number of years that needs to be you know, hit head on by some of the things we've discussed, and hopefully people on this call are doing things around these already. So one question I got asked from a client recently, so I've taken multiple client data to pull this chart here. Well, is it an age thing or is it a length of service thing? So these are the engagement scores cross-tabbed against each. Such a simple piece of research, and there's actually two things going on here. So if you look at sort of the newest people are the most engaged, hence the darker blue, and then that engagement level drops as you're looking at length of service. But by age, looking across, it tells us this. So it tells us these two things, and the two things are younger people are relatively less engaged than older people. You see that day in, day out. And I always say they're a tough audience. Can't remember which comedian said that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Far
You've got,
harder, yeah. I mean, Mel,
yeah.
because you see it day in, day out in results, not just within food manufacturing, across most industries. And where it isn't like that, where I see young people who are more engaged, I'm like, oh my goodness, what you're doing differently, because I rarely see that.
Agreed. And it speaks a lot to the brand and what they've grown up being influenced by and assuming what jobs would look like for them. So this is fascinating. I love this picture and almost the fact that there's none with the 10 plus years service, rightly so, because they've been too little to start. But in the
Definitely. So that, yeah, the first call out is that younger people are a tough audience, much tougher. You might see or have heard research around, younger people, their access to communications and the ability to overshare and expect oversharing of information, and then come into the workplace where, rightly so, certain things can't be shared, and wondering, what's going on there, and that expectation versus reality as well. And even a simple thing, this sounds commonsensical. I was chatting to the team went with the other day about how old were you when you had your first job, and the younger
yes,
people didn't sort of start
older.
working until 18, probably legally they
Yeah,
couldn't. And you asked me, my first job was chopping wood at the back of a pub aged 8, and then a paper round from 11, and washing in a pub in a restaurant from age sort of 12, 13 through to 17, and then working in back of kitchens. And we could do all of those things, or maybe it was different back then.
yeah, I think so. Certain laws have come into place since
Yeah.
you were a boy.
Can't give an 8-year-old an axe and say go and chop the wood in the back of that for the pub
Yeah,
fire on a Saturday morning.
I
But
definitely
rightly
wouldn't
so.
trust them.
But just that simple thing, in having that thing low and seeing what works like, and those more menial jobs like working in a pub, very important jobs like chopping wood for the fire, but seeing that kind of work earlier on. And the other takeout as well is how the length of service impacts more than age. So you look at age and it's the same pattern as you look. So it's more length of service, apart from the thing that we've called about younger people, that increasingly more cynical or less engaged as you get longer. And I sometimes tell a joke as well. So this is part of succession planning. Is imagine somebody's just started and they've put in a van for the day or on a work line with Bob, and Bob's been there 10 years and Bob isn't happy, but I'm quite happy because I've just started. But after a shift with Bob, I'm thinking, why on earth did I take this job? Because Bob's just told me for the whole day everything that's bad about working here. So that's the problem, and hopefully you've seen that yourselves in it's commonsensical, but I've seen that in my own life. I've read over and over again in comments and focus groups with people at different length of service, and um, it's a
Yeah,
difficult challenge.
and what you just said there is so commonsensical about the importance of onboarding with people that enjoy the job, finding those champions for you, and that moment that matter in terms of the life cycle. That onboarding process is so critical, and surrounding by people with positive energy will go well. If you have that person, that's going to drain them less. So yeah, really interesting.
Yes, but it's managing. But it's also, if you are that way and your engagement levels are going down over time, and it's looking at maybe what are the different things that we can do to re-energize. So another example I give about one of my colleagues, he's forklift driver his whole career, he's getting bored and thinking, I'm going to go out of this, I'm sick of doing it. And then he was offered the job to be the forklift trainer. So now he's still in the world of forklift, but now a trainer and he loves it because he's seen as the king of forklift. He is the go-to person that's training all the next generation of forklift drivers, and it's given him a whole new energized lease of life. So drawing on that experience and that knowledge, getting him to do something differently within that world has made a huge difference to him and his health and his well-being.
Amazing. It's a great story around progression as well. Yeah.
Okay. Couple of things. So engagement across the life cycle, general pattern is that does go down over time, as we've just seen. So remember, it's length of service more than age typically, but there are challenges possibly with younger people nowadays. So in terms of reasons for staying for newer versus longer term colleagues, there is some crossover. So reasons for staying, career isn't on that list for longer term colleagues. For staying, sorry, for but career is very much on the list for newer people. So career is very important. People joining our organisation are expecting then that training and that development. But the reasons for staying when you're longer term is more maybe comfort in what you're doing and enjoyment of the job. Back to our lifer quote earlier, you've been here along, so you must, you wouldn't be here if you didn't enjoy it in some way, shape or form, and have a good relationship with colleagues and a good manager and whatnot, and it fits your life pattern. In terms of reasons for leaving, some similarities. Pay is going to be up there for most, but career again. So remember, the reasons for staying and joining an organisation is often that need or that want or desire for training. But if it's not happening, it's going to be high on the list for you. And then longer term colleagues who are thinking of leaving, recognition is beating pay. So that's really, really interesting. So it's giving them that thanks and appreciation. Back to my friend Kevin. Other names are available. So giving him recognition that you are experienced and we can give you a new role, that made him feel so much better about life and happier about life, that was being recognised, that experience. If we look at growth as well by length of service, so a distinct drop off in training and growth ability as you go down and down again. Now, career wasn't more in the younger than the longer serving people, but as we've just shown from Kevin, is that often there can be a forgotten audience, longer people. Oh, John, you've worked here for many years. You must be happy. We don't need to do anything with your career. You've never complained about it. But it is still in the mix for longer serving. But it's vitally important for newer people. Don't promise anything you can't deliver. And I'm joining because I want that training and that development. If I don't get that very quickly, then that will impact me and possibly why we maybe have that revolving door. Yes, it's a hard job. But if it's a hard job and there's ability to grow and develop, then I can possibly see the opportunity cost in staying through that hard job through to the other side. And then recognition, look how dramatically that gets low for our longest serving people as well. So back to our succession planning, if we want to retain those longest serving people a little bit longer into retirement, as is the way nowadays, just that thanks and appreciation for that longer group can go a long way. Now, just
be relatively simple, right? As well.
Yeah. Some of the open comments from under 1 year. Now, there was a 10 percentage point more engaged for this. I'm not saying younger. This is a newer group. Been under for 1 year. Lots of comments around career development and training, as we've just seen. Still lots of comments around machinery and things not working correctly. So even in those early stages, they're complaining about frustrations. Maybe they're picking those up from Bob, who's been complaining about them too, and seeing it for themselves as well. So that continues as well. So as we said, those small things make a difference, not just for the lifers and longer term people, but for even newer people in making that environment nicer, especially if it's a shock to the system that you've not worked there before. If things aren't working properly, then maybe I'm going to think about a different career. And lots of comments around work-life balance, flexibility of work-life balance, shift patterns, again, shock to the system, but people increasingly wanting more flexibility in the workplace. Now, if you look then for the 6+ years, this was a really interesting dynamic when I looked through the comments. So back to the revolving door. So as an experienced person who knows what I'm doing and knows what I'm doing well in my job, I read lots of comments around their frustrations with churn of people below them, new people coming and going, short staffing and people not having the level of training to deliver the job, which is probably going to put a strain on me as a more experienced person, or I'm going to be the person that has to train them as well, being that more experienced person. People not being able, my frustration that they can't do their job and you're not the right person for the job. Now, I do hear this as well anecdotally in if we're struggling to recruit people, then are we going to recruit the right person, or are we just going to recruit any person? So that's really in the mix. So it's surprising to me when I read through the comments just for 6+ years in food manufacturing, that's standing out as a frustration for our longer serving people. Mel?
Yeah, I think this resonates a lot with people on the call because there's a high use of agency staff in this sector, and we all know that, and contractors. So it's almost like I was thinking about exactly what you've just given your example of Kevin. If you have somebody that actually enjoys training and retraining and training people again, it's about rethinking that deployment as well, isn't it? And playing to people's strengths and where they get their energy from. So if Kevin's counterpart, Kathy, doesn't like retraining them, but Kevin does, then he's the person to find to help them a little bit more and be on point for the agency as well. So yeah, really, really fascinating.
Good point, definitely. against the frustrations, these small things coming up time and time again. Doesn't matter what your length of service is, everybody talking about those frustrations. Interestingly, more likely to talk about benefits in different ways, like right to buy holidays, more flexibility, time and annual leave. Speaking from experience of working for 30 years, I'm probably a bit more tired than someone that's only worked for five years. So holidays are really important in me to reset. Now, is that an ageist thing to say or not? But Kevin's been there for 30 years as well, worked in a really hard environment, been on his knees fixing things and machinery and whatnot. And that holidays benefits, other things like that can go a long way to help in especially in those later lives. But for everybody nowadays, the expectations may be higher. And then carrying on that in terms of more flexibility for longer serving people, sometimes especially slightly older people, maybe coming to the end of their mortgages as well, maybe a bit more financially secure than younger people trying to get on the ladder as well. So I can back off my hours, or the ability maybe to give options for people on shorter working weeks, less hours of work, or flexibility as well. So there were some of the differentiators in the open comments themselves. Well, please do read your open comments. You'll probably spot some of those patterns yourselves. So in conclusion, just going to leave a bit of time at the end in case any questions coming through to the chat or Q&A. The inspiration that we started with. So everything that we're seeing, it's not boiling the ocean. I hate the cheesy business phrase, not boiling the ocean and whatnot. Look within your own organizations at those small things that can be brought together to make that big difference. Those little details are vital, the locks on the toilet doors and better lockers and the food in the canteen. My favorite quote is, if you cannot do great things or you can't do them quite yet in terms of changing the whole culture and manager capability and all these other things as well, look at those small things. And the things that people recount as well from an employee survey are those small things because they're tangible. So if I said the toilets need cleaning and we put more cleaning in the toilets, the next time I fill a survey, well, actually, you listen to me. I might not see the culture change that has to happen over 5 years, or increasing accountability for certain people that happens over a long number of years, but I will see that there's better food in the canteen when I'm doing a hard job. Back to what small things, there's no excuse for not providing screen wash and add blue coolant. There's no excuse for maybe replacing carpets. There's no excuse for putting that TV back on the wall. There's no excuse for having, more cleaning of the toilets. And there's no excuse for many of these things as well. So if they're not being fixed, then there's no excuse why we can't do some of these things. How would that make you feel doing that difficult job? And then just final bits, how to take this forward, keep it simple. If we do want to go at those small things that make a big difference, let's sit down with our people and say, well, let's identify those things, locks on toilets, canteen food. Let's map them all out. Let's put them onto the chart then in terms of high effort or low effort. So we're looking at the low effort, high impact items and then move from there. So that's just a way of workshopping things in how you can then drive that well-being, happiness and general satisfaction and engagement. So I hope that you found that useful, covering things from many angles. I did say at the start that I'm analytical and that's how I look at the world. I hope you've managed to bear with me through all of that data there, but hopefully with some good examples as well on there, like Kevin and Bob and ourselves as well, and what we did when we were younger moving through. Mel?
Great. Thank you, John. That was really insightful. I think I've only got one more question if from an attendee. If anybody else wants to pop anything in, please do. So we'll just answer this live. So this person saying these stats seem to match their workforce. They feel what we're talking about. But do you have any insight as to what a healthy turnover rate might look like?
So in terms of, if we just take the question on intention to stay or leave,
yeah.
So the typical red box we call flight risk.
Yes.
So that's those who don't intend to stay in effect they're not intending to be here 12 months, within the next 12 months, so they're going to leave. That's normally 8 to 14%. Now it's different. That's just people who are intending to leave. Of those who intend to leave, then obviously not all of them will leave, but there's a high propensity of those who intend to leave. Actually leaving, it's quite a bit higher. Once you've said I'm going to leave, you're either in the mindset and you're not delivering your job, or you are going to leave. When we look back at those who did leave after, so 8 to 14%. Now, attrition rate's probably going to be higher than that. There's a whole group of neutrals then as well. So that can, sort of be 20% and plus in the middle. So that's possibly people who are intending to leave but don't want to say I'm intending to leave, or maybe we're going through restructuring a change and they want to see. So there will be a percentage of people who stay neutral on that who are also going to leave. So if you add, maybe half of those to the 8 to 14, you could be looking at 20% plus. Now, when I present that to people in all sectors and say, your attrition risk is like 12% or 16 is higher than normal and you've got neutrals, how does that stack up with your actual attrition? Some people are a bit guarded in telling me the exact figure, but say, actually, that sort of matches. And the way it matches even more is when you look at that red flight risk figure by different sites. And there'll be a site or a few sites with a really big attrition risk number. And they will then tell me the attrition at that site is far higher than the other site. So it's just backing up what we already knew. Sometimes, though, they'll say that's a surprise to us and they're about to have attrition that they didn't know about. And even down to a local team level as well, within a site. So it really stands out when you look at the data on flight risk, and you can do something about it then because it's not yet happened, it's about to happen. So sorry for such a convoluted answer to your question.
Definitely. And people no, really interesting and agree. Like people tend to tell you, don't they? Which is quite helpful to a sense so you can address it. Great. Well, thank you for the insight. I don't believe we have any other questions to answer. So a huge thank you to everybody that has joined us today on this live session. You will receive a recording, as it says here on this slide, and there'll be some other relevant materials. I know we've just launched a really interesting case study in this space as well, that gives you some really interesting return on investment and demonstrates what another client has done in this space. So do look out for an email from Lucy, who will be contacting you all after this webinar. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Bye-bye.